Good morning, everyone. Those of you who watch this will likely see it by clicking on a link called newbuyerrules.com, which is the subject this morning of the new rules that are in effect this week having to do with purchasers buying residential real estate. And at the conclusion of this video, by the way, we're going to roll into another one that you'll have a link you can click on the new seller rules for selling residential real estate. And if you know anyone, like parents, friends, who purchased real estate prior to, let's say, July 1 of this year, they would have experienced what I'm going to call the old rules. So that any guidance in particular that they want to give you about their experience under the old rules really isn't going to help you under the new rules. And so before I roll into the new rules, I can tell you that part of the motivation for me to be here this morning doing this video for you to watch on the internet is that in the past couple of weeks, I've done 5 different presentations on the new rules. And 2 of them were to buyers, 2 of them were to sellers, and 1 of them happened to be to a past client who had an MBA degree from one of America's foremost graduate business schools. And I can tell you, the good news is, at least as a working realtor, I'll introduce myself in a moment. The good news is that as far as the sellers were concerned, they did ultimately sign the paperwork having the full presentation. And the buyers actually bought after getting the full presentation. And the MBA, however, had the same reaction that those other 4 had, which is to say, at the conclusion of the explanation of the new rules, their faces glazed over. And literally, if you in the audience had been a neurologist and you had been present in the room and looked at their faces, you might have said that these people were having a stroke. Did they really understand what was going on? And the answer is not really. And I, your presenter this morning, I think I'm a reasonably educated and modestly articulate person, and I've attended live and online trainings on these new rules, which I'm about to talk to you about. And I will tell you that you may want to end up watching this video a few times so that you comprehend what's going on. So, how did we get here? By the way, for starters, I'll get to how we got here. My name is Andy Norton, and I am a realtor in Virginia, Maryland, D.C., and actually licensed in Florida as well. And I am with Sampson Properties. I am not, by way of a disclaimer, I am not here in an official capacity for anyone. I am not here representing my company, Sampson Properties, nor am I representing any association of realtors, nor representing any other interested party in these new rules. What I'm trying to do is to bring some consumer clarity to what's going on. Now, how we got here. There was a big lawsuit that went on last year, and the verdict was in November. And at issue in this lawsuit were issues such as antitrust, price fixing, transparency, competition, negotiation. We'll call it a witch's brew of issues such as that. I'm not an attorney, I didn't play one on TV, so we'll just say that the lawsuit was a big deal, a federal deal. It was in Kansas. And the verdict came down against the National Association of Realtors and other defendants in this case. And as a result of that verdict, there were settlement negotiations that went on. And the amount of the fines that would have had to have been paid, I think I may be off by a penny or 2, but as far as NAR was concerned, including damages, it would have been in excess of $5 billion with a B. So there was a settlement agreement that was reached. And this week, and this is being taped in the first week of, the beginning of the week in the middle of August 2024, this is when, nationally, the deadline is for these new rules to take effect. And this is, by the way, binding from the Atlantic to the Pacific and the Canadian border to the Gulf. It's everywhere in the United States. And if you're dealing with a realtor, it is binding upon them. So To the extent that the realtors must abide by the new rules, and believe me, we must. And both in the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, realtors must. As a buyer, though, which is the focus of this video, your first choice is, do you even want to work with a realtor at all? Because as a consumer of real estate services, that's your fundamental choice. Do I want to be represented by a realtor as a buyer's agent? Okay? That is your choice. So let's take the paperwork first, and then we'll get to the money. Because the paperwork has its own set of controversy about it in many states. So before you can actually be shown a house, one home, anywhere in America, you need to have had a meeting with the realtor who's going to show you that property and have a written agreement with that realtor, typically a representation agreement. And among the issues that you will be talking about will be the duration of this agreement. And so a buyer rep agreement can be as short as a day or even part of a day. If all you want to do is see one home and you don't really know the agent and the agent doesn't really know you, but the agent must, as I say, have a written agreement from you of some duration, you can feel reasonably comfortable. I mean, look, you should read what you sign, and you need to understand what you're signing. But the realtor will be required to have paperwork from you to prove that they and the company that they work for are complying with this agreement. So if you don't know the agent, they don't know you, and it's one house, the buyer agreement can be for one house. I did one a few weeks ago where some people found me on an online portal. I didn't know them, they didn't know me. I showed them 3 homes on a Sunday. The agreement started at 11 in the morning. It ended at 12 midnight of that same day. If they wanted to buy any of those homes, they needed to buy it through me. And then we'll talk about the money in a second. But the paperwork from the realtor needs to be in place. And the realtor needs to describe to you, what is it exactly that they're going to do for you? What's the duration of this agreement? And then, because I said we would get into the money part, how much the realtor will get paid. So one of the huge issues of this lawsuit, I would say number one, if I were to rank them, I'm not an attorney, one would be negotiability. Under the new rules, everything, as you'll see in a moment, everything is negotiable. How much the agent that you're working with as a buyer representative, how much will they be paid by you? And if the agent wants to be paid X, and you say to your agent, wow, that's too much. I think you should only be paid Y. The two of you can have a conversation that results in some kind of a negotiated agreement or not. Because the agent could say, I'm not willing to work for X, and you could say, I'm not willing to pay any more than Y, and you could either meet somewhere in the middle or agree to part ways right then and there. But that's negotiation number one, and that needs to be in writing, and it will set forth how much money maximum, we'll get to minimum in a moment, how much money maximum can that agent earn representing you? And that's in writing, you'll sign it, and then we're off to the races with respect to paperwork. Now, I should add incidentally, yeah, the buyer rep agreement can be short, but it can also be longer term, of a much longer duration. If you know the agent and like the agent and trust them, then obviously the buyer rep agreement can be substantially longer. But you should definitely read the agreement and know what it is you're signing, because now we get into the money part of the new rules. So under the old rules that you may have heard of, when a transaction went to closing, there would be a commission paid, and typically the commission would be paid by the seller, and often, I mean, not always certainly, but often, That commission would be split between the seller's agent and the buyer's agent. But under the new rules, the brokers are not splitting the commission. Under the new rules, you as a buyer are responsible at the end of the day for the payment of that commission to your agent. Now, your agent, and you can discuss this, and your agent can ask the seller to pay your commission that's due on your behalf. And the seller can say yeah, or no, or something in between, because that too is negotiable. But understand, as a buyer, you are on the hook. If the seller says, no way, I am not paying the buyer agent commission or any portion thereof, then as a buyer, you would be on the hook for whatever it is that you agreed to and at closing would need to bring that amount of cash to the table. Now, there will be sellers in a competitive market who can get away with not paying any portion of the buyer agent commission when and if asked. But if the market is more competitive, a seller may want to. And in the next video, we're going to get into in more detail why the market may dictate almost have to if they want to get their property sold. But I have heard of, just in the past week, a couple of cases with a local settlement attorney here in Northern Virginia where transactions went to closing and the seller said, no way, I'm not paying a dime on the buyer agent's behalf. And the buyer did come to closing and paid the full amount that they were obligated to under that buyer agent commission. So just know that is a possibility. Because these rules are new, most people have not heard of them yet. And you may well be asked to do this sooner rather than later if you begin your house hunt. As a buyer, as I said at the beginning, you can choose to be represented by a realtor. And yes, I'm a realtor, so I have a certain amount of bias here, but there is a long list of reasons why, as a buyer, you should and would benefit from representation by an agent. But you don't have to. And because of how convoluted these new rules are, and as I say, the first half dozen people I've discussed this with don't really understand them, if ever there was an argument for a buyer going directly to a seller and saying, I don't want anything to do with these new rules. This strikes me as, and you can put whatever adjective you want in the blank at the end of the sentence. You can go directly to the seller's agent and work out a purchase on a house. Just know there are a couple of things to be aware of. The first, the seller's agent does not represent you. The seller's agent represents the buyer, represents the seller and the seller only. I'll say again, the seller's agent only represents the seller and not your interest as a buyer. So, but you can do it that way if these new rules sound oppressive to you. Another thing to keep in mind as to the ultimate obligation for payment of the commission. Even though in the buyer rep agreement it will say that you as a buyer are paying your broker a certain amount of money, whatever that money that you agree upon is, that can be further negotiated down the road if the situation arises. So if a seller says, I will not pay all of the buyer agent's commission, but I'll only pay a part of it. If as a buyer you don't really have the cash to pay the rest of it, you can ask your agent, will you negotiate your commission down? Conversely, in the spirit of negotiability of this, if you're a really great buyer and the seller has no other contracts to choose from, the seller could turn to their agent, typically called a listing agent, and ask their agent in the privacy of their negotiations, hey, this is a really good buyer. I'd really like to sell to this buyer. Will you, my seller's agent, my listing agent, negotiate your commission downwards? So it's contemplated in this settlement. There are negotiations going on at the beginning, But there are also going to be negotiations going on, in a sense, all the way through this. It definitely will help you as a buyer if you choose an agent that has some experience in negotiating. It may also help if you have some, but I'll tell you that most of the clients that I have worked with thus far do not have the degree of negotiating experience that one would hope they would have to navigate this new landscape. So if your agent has negotiating experience, that's going to help you. To sum up on the buyer side, the new rules emphasize negotiation and between the parties, so that it's all above board and transparent, and that if you as a consumer of real estate services understand what you're signing, and everything is negotiated at arm's length, and everything is transparent in the documentation, then as a buyer, you should be okay with the new rules. But whatever you do, please be sure that you do not take as binding advice that you got from somebody who did a deal in the past and had no experience with the new rules. And I am happy to speak to any viewer of this video, either online or in chat or by phone, for additional clarification if anyone wishes. It's my hope in this, because this is going to be on the internet, that anybody who is from my company, anyone who is from an association of realtors, anyone who is an attorney would look back on the prior, what are we at, 15 minutes roughly? Would look back on the prior 15 minutes and say, Andy, yeah, you pretty much covered the bases for buyers in this new landscape. I would hope that would be the case. But again, if any of you want to reach out, either in the chat on YouTube or in any other medium, I am happy to discuss further with you. Thanks very much, all, and we will now begin with the new seller rules. Thanks again. Have a good day.